Yeah, firstly, just a really big thanks to London's Calling for having me. Thanks to all the sponsors, and thanks especially for the tech people at the back for just sorting things out. Thank you very much. So I just wanted to get a bit of a sense of the room to start with. So could I ask, could you put your hand up if you've implemented a solution on the Salesforce platform that you were particularly proud of and you thought was kind of quite innovative and potentially kind of a reusable solution? So lots of people work in Salesforce. Okay, good number of hands up. You can keep your hand up. Thank you. And keep your hand up if you have reused a solution from a previous implementation in a different org, so for a different customer or in a different context. Okay, great. Lots of people. And could you keep your hand up if you published an app on the AppExchange? A few at the front, but yes, okay. Great, thanks very much. Everyone can put their hands down now. So I've got a theory that the difference between the number of people who've published versus shared a solution is at least partly down to the kind of perceived complexity around publishing to the AppExchange. And I'd like to share some learnings that I've had through my journey of publishing to the AppExchange in sort of various contexts, and hopefully to help you understand that some of the things that you kind of think of as perhaps quite difficult and challenging, there's opportunities to go through some of those processes without perhaps some of the difficulties that you might perceive. So very quickly, I'm sure the entire room already knows this, especially having had the wonderful demo jam earlier. But very quickly, the AppExchange is much like the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store, that's what it's called, isn't it? In the sense that it's an opportunity for independent vendors to offer their solutions that run on top of the platform, in this case, Salesforce. So taking a solution that's kind of worked in an org and turning that into an app is a little bit like making a sandwich. So at the core, you've got the solution that you've seen and kind of been involved in the implementation of. So you can think of that a bit like your kind of favorite tasty ingredient. So for me, that would be a nice blue cheese. Now that might work really nicely on its own. But if you kind of slice that a little bit differently, maybe decorate that with some lettuce and tomatoes, and wrap it within some nice fresh bread, you could have something even more special. And it's the elements that I want to kind of concentrate on in addition to the solution itself, that are kind of part of offering an app on the AppExchange. So specifically kind of making sure that it has an intuitive and flexible user interface and ability to configure for different kinds of orgs. You need to consider the packaging process, so the technical process of sort of wrapping that in a package and offering that through the AppExchange. So creating a listing, thinking about how you plan your commercials around that app, if that's a paid app, how you kind of get the information about your app out there, and how you support the app long term as well. So very briefly, just a little bit about me. So I work as the head of product for GiveClarity.org. We're a Salesforce partner. We work predominantly on implementations of Salesforce for nonprofits of all sizes, including some of the world's largest NGOs. We also publish 3 AppExchange apps, and we have an app for on-platform ETL processes. We have an app for supporting UK charities with gift aid claims, and we have an app that helps with flexible banking integrations as well. Outside of our work with GiveClarity, also self-published an app a few years ago under my company Cloud Sundial, and so that formula share. So it supports with sharing requirements that involve related data in the definition of the sharing logic. So allowing sharing record records based on their relationship with other records in the org and the contents of those records. So that was initially, that was kind of an abstraction of a solution that I'd been involved in the implementation of in a couple of different customer orgs. And the process for me, kind of taking that and building that into an app and offering it through the App Exchange, I think is kind of, that's sort of, that's kind of what I'm thinking of when I say sort of sandwich apps. That's sort of taking a customer solution and offering it on the Exchange. So I want to start by talking a little bit about how the App Exchange is in comparison to sort of some similar kind of enterprise app stores. There's some quite kind of interesting differences between the models that these app stores have. So looking at the Salesforce App Exchange, the Atlassian Marketplace, Shopify App Store, and Microsoft App Source, which is where Dynamics 365 and the Microsoft Cloud apps are offered through. So in terms of sort of the financials of offering apps through these platforms, so Salesforce, as you might be aware, there's a upfront fee for the security review process, which is currently $999 per attempt. Typically, you have to do more than one attempt, so that's kind of a bare minimum, really. And Salesforce take a revenue share of between 15 and 25%, depending on the nature of the app. Atlassian Marketplace, on the other hand, there's actually no upfront fee to offer an app for Jira or Confluence or Atlassian products. Revenue share, similar to Salesforce, 15 to 25%. Shopify App Store, interestingly, so again, no upfront fees. They have a model where actually smaller vendors, so those that make less than $1 million a year revenue, pay no revenue share fee at all. And AppSource has a small fee for registering as a partner, and then a 3% revenue share model. So, as you can kind of tell from this, so relative to other sort of enterprise platforms, the cost of publishing to the App Exchange is actually pretty high. Now, there's various good reasons why that's the case. Excuse me. Okay, another lens I wanted to talk about a little bit is looking at the number of installations there are per published app, a number of installations there are in total of apps across these app stores in comparison to the number of published apps. So in the case of Salesforce, we're just over 5,000 published apps currently live, which have been installed in total. So just past this milestone, about 13 million times. The Shopify App Store, so a similar number of installs, but actually far more apps available for Shopify. AppSource and Atlassian, both far fewer installs, in fact, and again, sort of similar-ish number of apps available. Now, these are kind of based on some estimates in some areas, so don't read too much into these numbers. But I think what this kind of really sort of shows us is that actually relative to some of these other platforms, Salesforce is a pretty uncrowded marketplace. So there's a real opportunity, there's less kind of competition per install relative to some other platforms. So what do we take away from this? So yes, there is a higher upfront fee than there are for kind of some of these similar platforms, but there's also a significantly less crowded marketplace. And so really sort of, if you're considering publishing an app, provided that you can guarantee that initial income to effectively finance the cost of the review fees, the opportunity for success is pretty high, and actually I'd say higher than perhaps some of these other platforms. So I wanted to talk next about some of the kind of practical steps that you might want to plan in as part of publishing your app. So the first 4 steps I wanted to talk about, these are the steps that I thought were needed in order to publish an app before I'd done it for the first time. So of course, kind of framing and coming up with the right idea for the solution that you want to deliver, designing that, developing it. So in the case of a solution you're taking from an existing org, that's perhaps sort of refactoring and abstracting what works in an org to ensure that its works in an app context as well. And then of course the security review and publishing process. Now, what I hadn't really planned for the first time I went through this process was there's a number of other activities that actually can be progressed in parallel to some of these areas at the top and are almost certainly worthwhile doing in that way. So registering as a ISV partner with Salesforce, this is something it's completely free to do. Anybody can do it. And almost straight away, as part of registration, you're provided access to what's called a partner business org, which becomes the central environment for managing the subscriptions, the lead events, and so on associated with your app. It's a pretty special environment. It's an actual real enterprise edition org that you're given for free, which doesn't happen very often. So yeah, it's kind of great to get your hands on that quite early and sort of getting to understand how that org works. Planning your commercials. So there's a reason that I've sort of put this intentionally kind of behind both the design and the listing approval process, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. The listing approval at this stage is really kind of as an assessment of the business model and the business plan that you have behind your app. So that you don't need to have a full listing at this point, but what you do need to have is a good business justification and model for how you're going to offer your app. The distribution agreement is effectively kind of the solidification of the relationship that you have with Salesforce that is kind of behind the, sort of sits behind your monetization model. Of course, writing your draft listing, this is something that you can kind of progress in parallel prior to the security review process. And finally, probably the most important step on this journey by quite a long way is the success of your app in a massive, massive way is going to be about how you promote this, how you talk about it, how you get people to understand what the app is, and how it might apply to their org and to their problems. And of course, sort of reviewing, iterating, evolving the app over time. Now, I know what you're thinking. This looks a little bit like the Northern Line. Well, much like the Northern Line, it can be a little bit unpredictable, and you do want to make sure that you plan in a good amount of contingency to make sure that your journey goes as smoothly as possible. So, as I say, I didn't really plan for these elements on the bottom, and it took me about 3 weeks, I think, to go from registering through this sort of commercial kind of planning and distribution agreement process. The security review, Salesforce sort of say this takes kind of 4 to 6 weeks, so allow for this to happen twice effectively, so 8 to 12 weeks. I wanted to talk next about some considerations around framing your idea. So this is an image I borrowed from Dan Olson's book. I'll pop a link up at the end, the Lean Product Playbook. And it's a framework that helps you to define customer needs in a way that allow you to sort of easily kind of relate that to the value proposition and ultimately the solution that you provide. There's a lot to this, but what I wanted to concentrate on at this stage is this problem space element. So the problem space is kind of all about kind of understanding the landscape that your app is going to potentially address. So it starts with target customers. So thinking about and understanding as much as you can really about the potential target user personas that might benefit from your app. So in the context of Salesforce, I encourage you to think about end users, implementers, and decision makers as these personas. The underserved needs is about sort of mapping out from those personas what are the most important needs that they might have that could potentially be addressed in the space that you want to work within. And then the value proposition. So what is it about your solution that could help to address those underserved needs? So in the context of Formula Share, what I was kind of really encouraged by is that there's a really good resource out there for everybody that can really help with assessing some underserved needs, and it's the idea exchange. So I was aware that there was an idea that hadn't been delivered. It was about 25,000 points to allow for criteria-based sharing rules to use formula fields, and that was something that kind of came out of the box with Formula Share. And so knowing that, that helped me to define my value proposition and ultimately to shape the listing and even the name of the app from that one idea. So I wanted to talk, as I mentioned, about some commercial considerations. So firstly, just to reflect on the models that Salesforce allow for on the App Exchange. So apps can be offered completely for free, and in this case, the security review fee is waived. So this can be a really good way to kind of, as a ISV, to potentially kind of get to know the process of publishing an app and to understand the appetite that there might be for an app in your space. Freemium apps can be, this is a relatively new model that Salesforce support. Freemium app can be installed for free, but there are paid kind of options within the app to add features or perhaps to remove limits. A paid app, of course, is paid for all customers that take the app. And a paid add-on required, which effectively means that the app itself might be free, but to work effectively, it requires integration with an external service that costs money, and then that Salesforce have a different charging model, so that's a paid add-on required. So thinking through which of these is appropriate for your solution at an early stage kind of helps with assessing both the distribution agreement that you need to sign and also influences your design process potentially as well. I wanted to mention a quote as my favorite quote related to kind of product design in the context of usability. So any product that needs a manual to work is already broken. So this is kind of a different paradigm to working with an org. I would love to say that this comes from a really kind of inspirational and illustrious leader in our space. Yeah, anyway. But it's a really helpful kind of, really helpful kind of thing to bear in mind as we're sort of going through this design process. I'm a little bit conscious of time, so I'm going to sort of skip through some of these quite quickly. So this, sort of really kind of encouraging, sort of do take a walk in your customer's shoes. So usability is all about understanding those customers and those kind of underserved needs in a way that you can kind of influence the front-end design in your app. This is an example of a user journey map, which is kind of a really great tool in the product kind of space to help to sort of map out the emotional side of this journey as well as the practical side. To skip over this very quickly, but this is sort of part of, this was kind of a really kind of key part of what I was focusing on a lot in the early stages of Formula Share, was this sort of early process of what does it feel like to implement and to configure the app. The final few things I just wanted to mention are some suggestions for some kind of straightforward and crucially kind of low cost or free options to support this iteration and promotion process once your app is kind of out there and available. So firstly, of course, talking to your network, kind of get out there on LinkedIn, talk at community groups, talk to your colleagues, talk to connections. Specifically, it's really kind of good idea if you know sort of solution engineers, account execs at Salesforce. It's really great for them to know what your solution is and how it could potentially help customers. Similarly with contacts at implementation partners, the more people who work with customer orgs that kind of know your solutions out there and might help, the better. Thinking about curating the communication journeys that you have with people who install and sort of engage with your app. So this could be kind of automated marketing communications. It could be actually kind of one-to-one interaction is really helpful as well. I think people really kind of appreciate, particularly in sort of the early days of publishing your app, this is actually quite a practical thing to do. Is every org that installs in a sandbox or elsewhere, and that's an opportunity to reach out, see how it's going, kind of let people know there's a person behind and who can help out if they need it. And the final element I wanted to talk about is the importance of kind of reviews, especially at this sort of first stage of publishing an app. So there's a really interesting assessment that was done. So this is from Dorian Sabatov, who writes content for sfapps.info. He's recently published a State of App Exchange Apps 2024. And one of the elements of this that really kind of stood out for me is the assessment of the number of reviews per app. So across those sort of just over 5,000 apps that are out there, almost half of those have 0 reviews. So if as a publisher, you can guarantee or you can sort of encourage just one single review, you'll already be kind of reputationally sort of over and above almost half of app vendors. And yeah, sort of along those lines, only 20% have more than 10 reviews. So yeah, if you can kind of get that first handful, that really sort of sets you apart from other vendors in this space. Okay, so finally, so I hope this, hope this has kind of helped you sort of start to get to understand some of the elements that might go around the cheese in your sandwich. Of course, yeah, I could only really sort of scratch the surface on these things, but yeah, I'd love to kind of talk more if anyone's interested. I wanted to kind of leave just by recommending a few resources I've just found personally, just like, yeah, kind of really helpful in sort of the process of sort of thinking through sort of product design, product development and marketing. So Jakub Stefaniak, who's talking later today, so he's recently published, this is the first of its kind App Exchange Success Blueprints. This is a sort of independent guidance on how to publish to the App Exchange. The Lean Product Playbook. So this is a sort of product guidelines around design and development process. And as I mentioned, the State of App Exchange Market 2024. So a really big thank you to everyone. Thanks very much. Yeah, and do grab me after.